rent increases and the Renters' Rights Bill. So, at the moment, if a landlord wants to increase the rent, they can do that in a number of ways. First of all, they can issue a Section 13 notice giving 1 month's notice of the rent increase. Secondly, if there is a rent increase clause in the tenancy agreement, then they can use a letter, doesn't have to be a standard form, a letter to the tenant saying that they're going to increase the rent. Again, has to be a month's notice, but it will be in line with the terms and conditions of the tenancy clause. And thirdly, they can do it by mutual agreement. So if the landlord and tenant have a chat over a cup of tea and agree the rent increase, then absolutely, that's fine. Tenant pays a new rent increase and off we go. Now, under the Renters' Rights Bill, it's going to be slightly different. Any clauses in tenancy agreements that increase the rent will automatically become void as soon as the Act becomes law. So that's worth being mindful of. Landlords will only be able to increase the rent by issuing a Section 13 notice, and the notice is increasing from 1 month to 2 months. Although rents are not capped, they are going to be suppressed slightly, and landlords will only be able to increase the rent by market rate. Now, at the moment, a tenant can challenge rent increase by appealing to the first tier tribunal. And what happens? The tribunal will have a look at the rent increase, they'll have a look at the comparables, and they'll do some other research, and they'll decide what the rent should be. At the moment, the tribunal can either set the rent at what the landlord wanted, they can reduce it to a rent that they think is more reasonable, or they can actually set it at a higher rent if they think that the landlord's come in too low. That rent will then be backdated to the date that the landlord wanted the increase. Under the Renters' Rights Bill, what will happen is tenants will still be able to appeal to the first tier tribunal, absolutely, but the tribunal won't be able to set a rent higher than what the landlord has requested. They can still set it lower. But also, the rent won't kick in, the new rent, until the tribunal have made their decision, and it will not be backdated. So what this means is if a tenant appeals the rent increase, and let's say the tribunal will agree with the landlord, that new rent only takes effect from the rent due date after the decision. It is not backdated, so the tenant won't have a load of arrears sort of like that they have to pay off. Those are the differences. So it's really important to know that any rent increase clauses in your tenancy agreements will be void under the Renters' Rights Bill, and you'll only be able to increase rents using a Section 13 notice, giving 2 months' notice. Tenant can appeal, and the new rent only kicks in on the rent due after the tribunal decision.